we will be taking a look at the axiologic standard model, having a review of what will serve as an equivalent within the Panatrivium system for alignment. But instead of just being a straight rip, as some might pursue, what makes this different, what sets it apart, is the notion, the fact, the identity of being scalable from the most microcosmic of entities, be that an organism with the most minute capacity for cognition, all the way up to incredible, well, let's say, gestalt consciousnesses. This will be able to cover just about all of it, and it is, by virtue of that, as intricate as one wishes for it to be. Here today in Ethical Executions, we will be taking a bit of a resume on our original venture of this last stream, and playing a little bit of Hitman contracts, to then be followed by the demonstration of quite an integral part of the Panatrivium. We will be taking a look at my axiologic standard model. As you may have recalled if you were here for it last time, we took a look at the general Panatrivium standard model, which was our cosmology, the engine that enables us to have the space, time to magic, at least equivalent, that we were able to experience within the game and all of its settings, as well as enabling us to import any other settings that might be desired. But to begin with, then, we will be getting into our game. Several other systems, especially your more traditional tabletop role-playing games, alignment chart, in its simplicity, has a couple of qualities about it. The first one is that it enables a more broad interpretation of exactly what the alignment could pertain to in the context of the player, an organization, a faction, government, state, something on the order of that. The less ideal portion is that it is so vague. It doesn't really give much grounding to anything unless you're looking at something like the Great Wheel cosmology, or you're attaching some sort of higher order connotation or even denotation to it, perhaps making evil good, lawful and chaotic something that is palpable, something that is tangible, something that can be interacted with in a directly sensory fashion, or at least a corporal one. Can we just take a moment to admire the beauty of this environment? This is legitimately just the first starting area in a side corner that you're likely not anticipated to take much time to even traverse, and yet they've managed to make the environment genuinely something you could have a screenshot of to sell the thing. For those of you who are unfamiliar, axiology is the logi, study, or account, I prefer the translation of worth, value, how we all place concern on a given thing. You might consider monetary worth, or maybe even material. You'll then perhaps be able to get a bit more of a closer metaphor between what these are from the high abstraction of axioms, what we take as a given, what we take as an assumption, and the consideration that we grant to things, made aloud and expressed forthrightly, or contained within the normative acceptances of a culture, custom, ethic, way of being, some manner of keeping track of all of the things that, whether it is an individual or a group, care about, and that is axiology. I do like that PS2 blur that's still affected even with the crispening HD patches and everything that I've applied. Just the stolidity. For anybody who's ever lived a number of years in their lives, they'll probably have experienced evolutions in one's axiology internally or externally, in that they found themselves in other groups, that they take different values. This system is flexible enough to apply it as an average, or if you needed to call upon something very specific. And let's think about the applications for that. An average, a mean, something that we typically consider what one might put down as their alignment, what they want to aspire to, what lies at the center of their considerations. but in the more acute. Let's say you had means, whether it is technologic or something more transcendent, of drawing out the exact drives that a creature or group has in a moment. And you could easily, with these very simple axes, call forth exactly that. Hey, buddy. I'll be coming for you. Let's say I am building a character that is an ancestor worshipper. What I care about the most in terms of time frame, what their forebears might have an impression of them, whether real or perceived. We would take a look at our very first, that being the angle. Go with a strong past. But what if they become a leader of sorts? They develop a consideration for their actions as they impact the people around them, and there is something of a contradiction between these. Well, we could easily put future-past. Whereas if they were taking a more measured approach, well, you could easily go with present. Let's say that approach to it is now not so much what would my ancestors think about everything that I'm doing in its entirety, but rather building upon that legacy, not to be judged on the basis of what my people before me did. That is where you could get something like present-past.
What can you tell me? I can tell you. I never want to see another pot of borscht. Thanks. Good luck.
Thanks, said with the most stolid face of all time. We can also devise our own systems. In the actual rulebook, there will be a few different arrays that one could present, taking into account all of these axes. But I'll just go ahead and give a prime example, simply to take each one of these. Just going down the line here, angle with a 1, approach a 2, development a 3, and so on and so forth, to know what exactly is of the highest priority. And these needn't necessarily be exclusive. You could have things on the exact same level. Let's say that I have a government that cares the most about making all of their decisions as comprehensively as possible for all people, as well as building passion, a strong, I'll use the term here, humanity, but if it's a different species, naturally they would have their own term. You could easily have your angle and your approach marked as 1 each, and then you could have all of the rest according to their own design. I know, obviously this isn't that game. I'm feeling the Splinter Cell need to shoot out the lamps. So then let's go down the list of axes and tenets. Those that are in the lighter shade of red are the axes. They're the sets that account for everything that is contained underneath. All of those that are in the darker shade of red are tenets, the elements within sets or parts of the wholes, if you wish to think of them in such a context. That means that we have the highest order, the category in your axes of what exactly an entire conception of value ought to be, and the tenets accommodate what concern is the most present. And as I had reviewed before, these are set up in something that is contradictory with something that is in the middle. You can think of it, as I tend to, and appreciate the thesis, the antithesis, and something of a synthesis out of these. I know, obviously this isn't that game. I'm feeling the Splinter Cell need to shoot out the lamps. You have your angle, what one might care about in time. If you have a care for what is to come first and foremost, ideas like futurism, something like transhumanism, or maybe you are simply a forward-looking optimist, you would find yourself on the tenet of future. If you are, however, more of a pragmatist, a worker with the immediate information and resources to hand, or you are attempting to administrate what is happening as it is happening, then you probably have the tenet focus of present. And finally, if you are on the tenet of past, you'll be looking towards things like what people before you did, what happened previous to your coming to be, or maybe on the basis of following the ideals and orders of leadership that is not contemporary. Wow, I didn't even notice that before. They've managed to render with MIP maps, perhaps an alpha channel, the glittering on the snow. Then if you look towards the axis of approach, you have a consideration for the means of cognition by which a matter is considered. In the tenet of logos, that is everything which requires reason, or at least rationale, and some amount of proof, some amount of a dedicated deliberation. For those of ethos, these are more matters of custom or habit, not necessarily tradition, but something that is a continuity, a perpetuity of what is done. And for those of pathos, these would be those who care most about the emotion, the flaring passion, the drives as they are built into the self, the gut feelings, if you will. Well, who has to worry about blown cover now? I am, very clearly, a nuclear scientist. What threat am I? I'm not gonna Oppenheimer you after all. Unless... In the axis of development, we have intricacy, the difficulty to grasp the depth of how it is made to be. And for those with the tenet of complexity, these would be those who prefer something that is as intricated as possible. They want the full breadth, the entire version of whatever there is to be made. For those who want something with elegance, on the other hand, they want a good mixture of something of form and function. They want something that does the job, but also doesn't take a tremendous amount of effort or consideration. It comes more intuitively. And for those who wish for simplicity, they will have a lean towards something more graspable to just about anybody. It need not necessarily be for simpletons, but something that is as streamlined and reduced as possible to the essence of what it is to be. 1 bomb, 2 bomb, 3. All for 1 person, 2 person, 3 person, me. For those on the axis of extent, this is how thoroughly a thing is to fill up whatever other thing is on the substrate. For those of proliferation, they will likely want to push a group of things into the entire scope that they might be able to fulfill within a context. For those who desire exchange, they're more likely to take a look towards having a little bit of back and forth with other entities, not necessarily to the exclusion of themselves, but definitely to the benefit of whatever kind of state they're attempting to maintain. And for those who desire isolation, well, they're going to want to usually occupy as little of an area as possible and keep to themselves. They don't care about any other entities or widening their presence. Back in the snow pits. You know, it seems between this game and the last, there's something to falling into pits, which seems to be a concurrent theme. The axis of importance takes a general concern for what kind of stuff you care about. For those that are on the tenet of concrete, they will generally lean towards a touchable substance, a feelable sensory material, rather than just something that is otherwise not so corporal. For those who desire something that is applied, they'll want, per se, maybe some symbols, maybe some form mixed in with their function. Think aesthetics. But they don't want to fall either into reduction of all abstraction, nor a complete absence of the palpable. They want a blend. And for those who are on the abstract tenet, they'll take a lean towards things that are formal, things that are mental, things that are psychological, or otherwise not something that you can just hold in your hands. Maybe you might be able to see them within your mind's eye, or feel them. Think back to viscerality. Man, I'm awfully glad you can't see over that ledge. Bless the devs. The axis of index is the likeness one makes, the relationship that one takes amongst what they have in their perceptions. For those that take an objective tenet, they will generally go for the more empiric thing, something that has the opportunity of being shown as a fact. For those that operate more on the relative base, they take observations more considerably. They will not necessarily buy directly into what they observe in so far as facts, as far as measurements, nor will they buy fully into the idealisms, beliefs, and faiths. For those who do fall into the subjective tenet, they otherwise do care a great deal about those exact faiths, wantings, perceptions made within the self, those experiences, above necessarily anything that can be shown to be measured. I wonder how 47 got in here. Frankly, there doesn't seem to be anywhere that's especially convenient to hide oneself. I think he left himself disassembled on all these boxes and then with his special powers of being the Hitman, put himself back together after. The axis of interaction is primarily concerned with the modus operandi of socialization as how they should interface. The division tenet is about the self. It is about separation from other individuals, whereas the solidarity tenet is more concerned with free association, the ability to move in and out of groups and choose one's participation at will, where unity primarily regards trying to hold as many things tight together as possible, and I exclude the word individual from that, in that it concerns the wholes or totals rather than the things that constitute them. Poor man. You know, if he didn't have the intention to buy and use a dirty bomb, or at least sell it, I might feel bad for him. In the meantime, I'll just sit here. I'll take a wait. The axis of methodology is about how you seek to accommodate an end. What means are you willing to take to get to that place? And more importantly, what do you want to focus on? The tenet of construction is mostly in relation to bringing things up, rising them from nothing, or at least if not nothing, from a place that you find them into further and further heights. Reformation, on the other hand, is more concerned of altering whatever happens to be to hand. You might think of this in the positive sense as reformation, and in the negative sense as something of parasitism, and making it into something or utilizing it as it stands for your goal. Destruction as a tenet entirely disavows the idea of rising things up, instead of being additive, rather being subtractive, taking from whatever is to be found and cutting it down to whatever shape one wishes to attain. You know it's bad when you have to wipe your forehead in the middle of Russia. The axis of nature is entirely about how something handles heterogeneity. Those with the diversity tenet are more than happy to have a very highly heterogeneous group. That is to say, something that is made up of very unalike parts, or some perception thereof. Those of the tolerance tenet care more about setting standards and abiding by those standards to the exclusion of those which are considered undesirable or untenable. And those of purity care primarily about keeping to not just standards and exclusion of others, but exercising those standards to the fullest that they are available to be exercised. I guess I could just shoot him, huh? I wonder if that would count against me. I wonder if he would even care. He might not even stand up. I mean, when you gotta take a dump that badly, do you even care if I come at you like this? Me thinks not. Obligation as an axis is overall about where your loyalties are demanded necessarily. For those of the altruity tenet, they put the ought predominantly on making one's group the best it can possibly be, with what resources they have available. For those of mutuality, they emphasize more the exchange of resources and duties in order to benefit those involved together. And those of the opportunity tenet want themselves mostly to be elevated above others, no matter the state of a group they're a part of. He just keeps going. He forgot me for a second there. The participation axis is mostly oriented around what one should do within the confines of their living coil. For those of the activity tenet, they will desire above all to express whatever they are to their fullest, to fulfill whatever chance at opportunity that they have. For those of the consequence tenet, they care overall more about what the outcomes are going to be of their engagement in a thing. Those of the passivity tenet will generally try to abate or otherwise not get involved with as much as possible. Are you starting it or am I? Well, I guess that answers the question. That is the blankest stare, the most North European stare I think I have ever gotten to bear witness to, and the most staggeringly unmoving visage that I've witnessed in a video game. Well done. The power axis is more concerned about where do we want the ability to have mastery or dominance put. Those of the collection tenet want to have, well, as much as they can centralized as possible. Those of the delegation tenet would, more than anything, like to take what there is and hand it out to people, whether that's the right people or simply who is more subjectively preferred. Those of the forfeiture tenet want to see as little power in the hands of anybody as possible. That's them good Minecraft noises. The sentiment axis is primarily about how one feels, how one, well, takes the experience of whatever they're up to, whatever their value is. Those with a more affinity-based tenet will generally want more of an uplifting kind of outlook on it, while those of the apathy tenet, they don't really necessarily care one way or the other. They're generally more indifferent than anything about what their value system is. Those of the antipathy tenet will, more than anything, be against what their own value system is. And you can relate that to many real-life examples of people and organizations that may be self-loathing, or maybe act against their own system of values that break character by choice. Well, I'm not going to be grilled for a second. Well done on that scenery. And it does make good on preventing the player from getting outside of the bounds within reason. That's something I've always found very crucial to the immersion of the actual game. Not only do you need to have a good visage to your scenery, but you also then need to delineate the boundaries in a fashion that doesn't make it feel entirely artificial, at least if you want to maintain a player's sense of engagement in the world. And finally, the structure axis is oriented around what kind of lasting should be striven towards. For those of the stability tenet, they care more than anything about keeping things as they are, maintaining the status quo, where those of equilibrity want something that is a little bit flexible, but also maintains a spirit about it. And finally, those of the volatility tenet care more than anything about the free-formedness or active change of something. Former parlor maids describe him as amorous. Well, how about that? If there's any evidence that need be laid at one's feet to show the capacity for such a setting to evoke a real, immersive environ, just take one look at this. That is a guard post there, I do believe. Not the gollywobbles. Well, while we are waiting on these fellows to go someplace else, I do want to take the time to pile a little bit of admiration upon the looking through the keyhole mechanic that some games have taken very good advantage of. It gives us a real means, if we should wish to, not advantage ourselves with meta gaming tools, like the map, with all of its various characters detailed upon it, to nonetheless be able to utilize the realistic conditions of an environment to our advantage. If I recall rightly, we're all but entirely safe down... Never mind. How can we get out of this? Kind of gotten myself in a tough spot. Well, that'll do.
What's that?
Nothing. This is a fantastic little bit of environmental signification. Where we enter into this area, whenever I first came through the door, you can see that there are these linens, yes, out here drying in the pouring rain. But you also can see the open window there, with its delightful animation on that bit of cloth, immediately shows, hey, this is a place that you can come up through. Which there is conveniently, then, the ladder right here. And she couldn't care less. Good on her. In a similar fashion to what I was describing about Great Gatsby, with all of its threads within threads within threads, we have here the story of the actual people occupying the area, some of the individual characters, in particular the ones that we're taking out, and our mission, alongside Northcott himself. And I've had this perspective as well, ever since I began building out my own tools and the full set of lore on top of all of the core mechanics. That the mechanics themselves exist purely in an environment where immersion is the entire point of the thing, to allow one the environment in such a way as to complete that story interactively. The Beldingford Manor, besides what I've just mentioned, has all of that rolled into it by creating the environment first, then allowing the tools that one has to accommodate the exploration and narrative. As soon as I had come to say something about the end of the extractions to be made about this game, we see here something that can very much be taken from this. There is a value to this which is quite to the contrary of The Great Gatsby, as I began looking at this game through, just now becoming entirely clear to me as I look down onto these ill-managed streets, we'll say. That is the absolute decline of humanity in these recent times. That is to say, where The Great Gatsby had the avail of humanity in a certain sense, a contemptuous continuity despite itself. This is entirely about the opposite. The cessation, which is about it, as a consequence of its own actions, in such a fashion that it necessitates Agent 47 in a real context. Much to chew on there. You can see, to exactly what I was mentioning in the Belford Manor, we start in an environment that is entirely nonce, it's single use, in a little dumpy office, and yet we have the immediate invitation to place ourselves within the scenario as we are experiencing it. There was absolutely no need, ultimately, to put our start here within this block, other than to maintain our immersion. We have our exit over there, which is a vehicle in a fenced-off area. The core that we're intended to infiltrate, giving us the sense that there is a genuine contiguous world that this is all mingled in the midst of. You can even see over in the skybox, they've bothered to put up big city buildings. They put sincere effort into the act of making this a place you might find yourself in the shoes of 47. Locked. as I should have anticipated. I wonder if I can tail someone through then. That is a classic penetration tester tactic, incidentally. One that might get me killed. Tailing someone through a door which otherwise should be locked is an excellent means of gaining access to a place. And ultimately, it is something that can be applied very readily to just about any story. Whether you're looking at a character who leans more towards the classic archetypes of the bard, the rogue, maybe even the barbarian, having the patience to exercise in getting into an area they otherwise have no right to be into is an extraordinarily valuable method. Hey, how's your angle dangling? In totality, we have, within the Rendezvous in Rotterdam level, observed quite the black mirror of humanity held up against the rather glimmering gilded one of The Great Gatsby. While that holds a tremendous amount of value for social and political commentary, what that enables us to observe in the realm of fiction is our capacity to borrow and lean upon any given edge case, any given posterior fact of a setting, be it based in reality or elsewise, and draw that out into a mold for an experience. To be able to observe any given piece of a setting and spin a tale out of it, spin an experience out of it, spin an opportunity out of it for either a passive or active audience to engage in. Much in the same way as I have praised the liveliness that dwells within the pages of Fitzgerald's work, we see the exact same kind of effort put into this. I've often had the opinion that in order for an experience to be genuinely engaging in the personal sense, it has to effectively make way for the agency of the engager. Elsewise, we find ourselves in a big empty sandbox, and that, whether it be a linear level as these or something that is an open world, is something we don't really want to experience, at least unless that is the primary goal of the creation. Yep. You know, sometimes that's exactly how I like to sit too. Of Hitman contracts that I have experienced. It is a continuity of capacities for interaction not so dissimilar from how one might go through the process of a tabletop game in earnest, just single player. There are set rules, set mechanics, set designs, with a strong emphasis on the actual environment that you are intended to engage with and the context within which that environment sits. There's also piled on top as the thing that sets it apart, the opportunity to play with various tools, implements, and set pieces, along with all of the costumes, the outfits, the mannerisms that you have to master in order to keep clandestine. All in all, I believe that Hitman Contracts gives us a fantastic insight as to how to make proper stealth social engineering gameplay and utilize the contents of their environment to the fullest, from the bottom up to the apex